So yeah, my name is Omar. If you ever meet me, some people do call me Daniel, which is my middle name. Um, it's an unusual story, just that for some, there's no like special reason. It's just for some reason, my parents call me Daniel, even though that's not my first name. So I always have to kind of explain that to people because they will hear two different groups of people call me two different names, and it always confuses people when I meet them for the first time. Um, so my background, just briefly, I'm a game developer and a educator, and I work in and I'm CEO of Creative Genius Games, co-founder. Creative Genius Games was founded with the principle of telling meaningful stories through video games. Um, as we found that video games are very powerful, if not the most powerful medium when it comes to telling stories. We founded it about 14 years ago now, and we started off just doing consultancy work, freelancing, helping people that didn't have like the skills to make games and just working on their projects for them. Um, but over time, we found that we got more and more into kind of the explanation and the educational side of things. I think even from the beginning, we had this, this connection with the idea of meaningful stories, meant like fables, stories that had like a message that they were trying to convey. Um, but we started to lean more and more into the educational side of things. So we started to run events and workshops, and those were based on the idea of like a game jam, except we'd act as mentors for the participants and kind of guide them along the way and make sure that they consider different aspects of development. And I drew from my experience as a skills coach and working in the industry, as well as working as a teacher in schools, to kind of see that there was this gap between what you learn through mainstream education and what's expected once you start your first role in the industry. So whether it was people who were going independent and working on their own solo projects, or if it was people who were starting their first job, there was a lot of overlap and a lot of the same issues that they were encountering. So I started to do videos, I started to do like tutorials and workshops tailored towards dealing with those specific like main issues. So not like, a full year program, but just a couple of hours here and there just to cover a few key points. I could speak for days about some of the tips and some of the things that I've encountered that helps out some of my students, but obviously we only have about an hour. So I thought I wanted to tackle one of the topics that I personally found really useful for pretty much everyone that I've worked with. So if you're familiar with the development lifecycle, it varies a little bit whether it's software or video games, but if you've not heard the term, actually I think I've got an image of it in the background. It's these steps of going through having a premise, a plan, development, testing, and eventually release. And if you're trying to make your own game and you want it to actually reach a conclusion and get out there, and I find that following these steps is fundamental. Like whether you're doing a continuous development approach where you have like, you can spend weeks planning and weeks development and then weeks in shipping, or a more agile approach where you might spend a couple of days or a couple of weeks on each area and then kind of cycle through them. Knowing these steps is the first move into having a productive development. Otherwise you end up getting like bogged down and confused and stuck in kind of development limbo. So a lot of people I think are familiar with having like a games design document, and it's usually a large, like very detailed document that you make during the planning phase of development of your life cycle, which goes through all of the different details and things that you need in order for your game to like be fully fleshed out. What I find a lot of people don't often think about is establishing a strong premise. And when I say a premise, I'm not just talking about the idea for your game, but an actual document which essentially serves as a summary for what it is you're trying to achieve. Because with a good premise, you have something that you can hand out to either different members of your team, if you've got a small team, or it's something that you can refer back to at each stage of development and know that you're always on track. It serves as like a guidepost for what it is that you set out to do. So there's a few key things that you want to establish, and this can be done in like 20 minutes, an hour, where you just kind of make sure you know all of these key points about your game, and you put it down to like paper. I think if I'm going to see if I can if I can share my screen, that would have been helpful, but I'm not. I think it's on here somewhere. But while I'm checking, I'll just keep going, because if you have like notes, or if you're on your computer and you want to just type this up, I think it's really helpful to have these like key points. So I'll go through them one by one, and then at the end I'll explain how you kind of put it all together. So to start with, I like to define like what is a premise. At its core, it is like a problem, or is your goal. It's the thing that you're trying to achieve. So you want to make sure you have a clear definition of what you're trying to achieve. It is your single point of reference that every other phase of development will refer back to, and this is key. I found that a lot of my students I've worked with, they will sometimes, if you treat like the summary of an essay, they'll sometimes do all the work, and then they'll go back and then write up the details, because then they want to make sure it's done correctly, when it's meant to be the other way around. You figure out the details and then you do the work. And some of this is like, it's an accumulation of your vision. So you want to make sure you know your core game mechanics, the core plot of your story. You don't need to know the whole story, but you want to have a clear beginning, middle, and end. You need to know the specifications of your project. You know, is it like Xbox? Is it PlayStation? Is it PC? Is it tabletop? And you also want to make sure you know things like visual style. What in your mind does it look like to get to the end? You need to know the context. So first step, contextualizing your project. If you're working just for educational purposes, if you're working for personal development, if this is part of a larger project, or if you're just doing it quickly, knowing that helps you to decide what your priorities are and where the level of quality that you need. And when it comes to like where you begin with your projects, that varies depending on that context. So if you start with, like, say, inspiration, let's say you have an idea for a game to begin with, and you just want to start building it, you want to make sure that you know, like, what is the experience that you're trying to replicate? What's the story of this game that you might have in mind already? Do you have like a specific character that you want to build upon, or even a game mechanic that you want to build upon? You might have the game mechanic in mind first, and then you want to build the rest of it around that. Sorry. You might have a particular audience that you wish to impress, so you're tailoring your game around a group. Like if you've already made a game and you're trying to do like a sequel or something, or a theme, like at a game jam, they might have a theme that you're building around. So you want to know what your starting point is. I won't go into like every single step of building your premise, because I think would be here too long, basically. But I kind of want to establish how this all links together. So first thing, what is your, I like to break it down as like, what is your environment? What the environment that your game is setting is one of the key things you need to know. That could be not just your world, like is it fantasy, is it adventure, is it sci-fi, but is it 3D, is it 2.5D, is it third person or first person? Because the next step is, what is your interface? How do you as the player interact with that world? I always say this, like when you're designing a game, you always have to make sure you have these steps. Therefore, you always have to make sure you define it very early on, because once you know your environment and your interface, you need to know your goal. The main goal of your project, of your character, sorry, in your game, or the player in your game, you should be able to break that down as just its core essence. So if I give an example, one of my games, in Silent Symphony, you are trying to rebuild the sun. Sorry, in Starlight, you're trying to rebuild the sun. Everything in between the end, which is your goal, and the beginning, that can be decided a bit later. But what you need to know is the environment. It's a 2D side-scrolling game. You play like a platformer. You're playing as Timothy, and your goal is to rebuild the sun. Next, you need to know what your obstacle is. So what is the main obstacle? From a storytelling, you would refer to this as your antagonist. It doesn't always have to be a person, but the obstacle in Starlight is the darkness. Like the lack of light is the obstacle. You have to stay in the light the whole game, or at least most of the game, in order to proceed. So if the goal is to rebuild the sun, the darkness is the thing that's stopping you from doing it. And then it's like, what is your skill? What is your core mechanic? The thing in your game that allows you to overcome this obstacle. In Starlight, you have another character called Altair. He can produce his own light, and he is what you utilize to defeat the darkness. How you move him, how you interact with the environment is how you create a path that your characters can follow. You don't need to know every object in the game. You don't need to know every enemy in the game. You don't need to know every puzzle. This is like the game design document stuff. What you do need to know is who's your character, what are they trying to do, what's trying to stop them, and how do they overcome that. Once you've got that, that's the first step. Again, I'm not going to go into every single detail, but I just want you to like establish that part first. Next, you also want to be able to say things like, what is fun about your game? Why would people want to play it? I often say to people, I think the key thing that you want from an experience is a positive emotional experience. That can be anything from joy to excitement to satisfaction. But your end goal for your game is that your players have a positive emotional response to playing your game. You need to identify what that is, because at every stage of development, when you're implementing a feature, it's how does this contribute towards that goal? Are you adding a feature because you think it looks cool, or because you know this feature will lead to this positive output? And again, this is key, which is why you need to identify it early, and then you want to think about how you're achieving that. So if I use another example, thing in one of our games, Battle Drive, it's like the pride and satisfaction of defeating a difficult challenge is part of that process. So every stage we need to think about, how do we get the player to feel the challenge, and then how do we get them to feel satisfied when they overcome it? We can't just hold their hand, we can't just give them too many tips. Them figuring it out on their own is part of what they would enjoy. So we need to make sure that our design is centered around that concept. So just to recap, if we know our environment and how we interface with our game, and we know what makes our game fun and how we're going to like build on that, we need to know what our unique selling point is. That's what comes next. So your core mechanics might be something as simple as driving or moving left and right, but your unique mechanic or your unique selling point can be anything from the story of your game to where it's set to a specific mechanic, such as, again, in Starlight, it was interacting with the darkness using light. Other games, I think I always love to use this as an example. I think Portal, the first Portal game, the idea of using the entry point and exit point to manipulate your environment, that was their unique mechanic. That's what they were selling it on. Your best selling point, another key thing that a lot of people don't always know, is not the same as your unique selling point. Sometimes it is, but best selling points is something that might be common amongst multiple games. Your unique selling point could be something that only your game has. It should be something only your game has. They might be the same thing, but your best selling point might be graphics or destructible environment, or the soundtrack, but that isn't necessarily unique. So it's best to know both of these points. And then, as I mentioned earlier, you need to know your specifications. Like, what are the key things about your game that you put together in order to make it function? Like, a person needs to know, can they play your game? Do they have the right equipment? Do they have the console, etc. Once you have these things and you summarize that in a document, I always say the next step is to then, can you explain this in essentially like 2 minutes or less? So I usually do like a breakdown of, insert game name. So in my game, you play as this character who is trying to achieve this goal by and avoid these obstacles while doing it. So you put all of those key points in like a single sentence. You say what makes this game fun is that you are able to, and then describe like the core mechanics, the unique mechanics, and the best selling points. So you can use your I'll use Starlight as another example again. In Starlight, you can manipulate the shadows and you can interact with them directly in order to overcome obstacles and get around potential threats. Or you can change the lighting in the environment and unlock different powers as you navigate the world. So it's like you get that in there, but you try and do that in one sentence. Describe one feature, describe the benefit of that feature, and link that to like how that strings together to your ultimate goal within the game. How does that contribute towards the end game? Once you describe that, you can do that for your unique selling point, your best selling point. You just then add like core features at the end. Specifications at the end, and that sums up your game. So you might be wondering, why have I gone through all these details about establishing a premise and all of these key points that you might think, oh yeah, you know, we'd address that in a games design document, we'd cover that here and there. The reason why I say you summarize this in you can summarize this in a single page, because this way you never lose sight. One of the biggest hindrances to completing a project is scope creep. It's the idea that as a project evolves over time, you keep adding new things, you lose sight of your priorities, you lose sight of what it is that you should be doing. A strong and concise, and the keyword here is concise, premise allows you to keep sight of what it is that you're trying to achieve, and everything else is extra. And this leads me to just two more points that I would add in regards to your premise. One is a clear definition of done. Your premise isn't really finished until you know what should your end game look like. So as a designer, you might use other games as an example. You might take screenshots of other projects. You might borrow audio, get other game examples and show mechanics to say, this is roughly what I want my game to look like. If you have the technical skills, you can make a little demo or prototype. I'm not a big fan of AI, but for the sake of demonstrating what you're trying to achieve, you can use AI prompts to say, describe your idea. It will create like an image and say, this is roughly what I want. Now I have something to visualize. It's no longer an abstract thought. Now I can actually work towards building these things, to drawing these images, to making this content. So having an actual visual, I do mean that. It's not just about describing it, it's about having actual visuals, having a vision board of what your end game should look like. Then strip that down to just the bare minimum. And that's the second point, is your minimum viable product. What a lot of people focus on is, I want to make the best possible game that I can. But if you're looking to enter the industry, if you're looking to build your first game, what you should really focus on is, I want a finished product. I want something that a person can pick up, play, and enjoy. That should be your goal. Once you've done that and you've gone through all of the steps of development, you'll find that building on that and adding to that is easy, because you've already got a finished game. You're just making it better. But if you focus on trying to make it perfect the first time, you try and make it perfect before you make it finished, you will be stuck in development hell for ages. But if you can realize that making it first is the important part, making it good or making it polished comes second. An example of that, for one of our workshops, we made a game, Battle Drive. This was done during a workshop and over a series of events where we designed it. We went through like the art and the features and the mechanics, and we built a simple prototype. It was playable, you could drive around, and we're like, okay, this looks like fun. We took that further by saying, all right, we have all these ideas about what it could be. In 5 years' time, this could be a really fun game with multiplayer and multiple maps and DLC and all these cool features that would make it really exciting. But we're like, but could we just strip it down? What can we say without all of the bells and whistles? This game is fun. And you do that by saying, what's our core mechanic? Driving. What is our unique mechanic? And for Battle Drive, it's the destructible environment. The environment reacts to you, not just procedurally and not randomly or like fixed, but a kind of organic, changing environment that each time you play it, it has a different experience. It gives you a different experience every playthrough, but that experience is consistent in how you feel when you're doing it. And that was like our key thing. We had this really unique design that allowed us to create this unique and exciting experience. And we said, let's strip out all of the other features that we want and just focus on this. We'll create that simple beginning, middle, and end. You enter the game, here's your environment, here's your character, here's your goal, here are the things trying to stop you. You make it from the beginning to the end, and you should feel good once you've done that. And we did that, and we launched that at EGX in 2023. And it was one of the best experiences we've ever done, because everyone like really loved it. And we were having people coming up to us who we'd never spoken to or interacted with saying, oh, one of my friends said I should come over and play your game. And I remember that as one of like our best highlights of the entire event, is that feeling of having people recommend your product to someone else. It was far from a full game. It was far from a commercial game. It's not something we could sell. You could probably finish it in about 8 to 12 minutes, depending on how good you were. But it did feel complete. It had that beginning, middle, end. You felt accomplished when you reached the conclusion. And now, at the moment, we're just adding more details to it. We're just adding that more elements to make it more complete, to make it more robust, and to give players that longer experience. But having a clean, refined, minimum viable product is about saying, can you strip that down only to your unique selling point and your core mechanics and make it fun? Because that's where good game design comes in. Is it still fun if you don't have thousands of power-ups and all these floating numbers and dopamine fixes from bonuses and scoring? Can you make it fun just because it's a fun game? I think that is what you should be aiming for, and that's what you should define in your premise. What is your minimum viable product, and what is your definition of done? What is a clear goal that at the very end, this is what it should look like? When you have these two things and you can visualize these things, as like I said, have an actual vision board, have snippets of characters and environments and so on, then you don't lose track, you don't lose sight of what you're trying to achieve, and productivity is maintained so much easier. You're so much less likely to fall off track or to get bogged down when it comes to development. So why did I just spend the last 20 minutes describing having a good premise? Well, if we talk about the other steps of the development lifecycle, you'll see how having that good premise contributes to each step along the way. So if we talk about planning, planning is where we take our overall goals and we break them down into actionable tasks. We talk about things like SMART targets, where you make sure your tasks are digestible, they're realistic, they have like timestamps to them. They're not arbitrary. You know where the priorities are, like which task needs to be done in which order. All of this is part of the planning phase, and I do a separate talk about creating a good plan and breaking down your goals into objectives and how to organize those using different tools. But this is just about understanding that if you don't have clear goals and clear milestones, breaking those down into actionable tasks is impossible. So there's a very easy link to draw between having a clear premise and a clear plan. The main thing I would mention is your core mechanics, your unique mechanic, your best selling point, your beginning, middle, and end. Like, these are your milestones, meaning even if it takes a month or a year to develop each of these points, you know that your game has taken a major step forward when any one of these things are done. And when all of these things are done, you have your minimum viable product. And then when you refine these things further, you have your definition of done, your successful product, your final product. So that's, like, as I said, that's the easy bit. The actual strategies behind that can get very complicated. And like I said earlier, if you're doing a game design document, that's usually when you start fleshing that out. You do that during the planning phase of your development, of the development lifecycle. But you need to always be referring back to your premise, and you also need to have a good, clear idea of priorities, meaning your core mechanics are the #1 priority. Your unique selling point is like your #2 priority. Best selling point, I would say, is actually #3. You don't have a game if any of these things are missing. So if you know that if I remove one of these points, then you do not have a game, then those become your top, what I call your must-haves. Your should-haves are what makes it fun, what makes it enjoyable, what makes it worthwhile. And then your could-haves is at the bottom. These are the things that, if everything goes well, if you've got the time, you can add a little bit more to just polish it up. But you always make sure the must-haves come first, and then the should-haves, and then you can worry about the rest later. So that was a key point, and hopefully I haven't lost you. I haven't gone, off on any tangents, and you're still with me. Because the next point I wanted to raise is development. And I think this is one that we don't talk about as much. I think if you look online and you go on Google or YouTube, you'll find lots of talks about how to do planning, how to create a game design document, how to do SMART targets and SMART objectives, how to use agile development, stuff like that. But we don't often talk that much about actually being productive, because I mentioned this earlier. I think the three most difficult things when it comes to making a game and finishing a game: um, getting started, maintaining productivity, and then actually finishing it. Having a good premise is easy to do to start with, and it helps you with maintenance. It helps you with completion. So that's why I bring that up first. Another thing to help with productivity, and when we're talking about actual development, I'm not going to go into the details of what skills you need. We can talk about programming. We can talk about 3D modeling and animation. We can talk about narrative design. I break these things down in other talks because those are their own subjects. Those are their own fields. But when it comes to leading a project and seeing it through to the end, the key things that you need to keep track of. One, a very important term that I learned during my time as a skills coach, and when I was working, this works across all types of projects: understanding productive hours and understanding capacity. So productive hours is a term that's it's known in the industry, but it's not known we don't talk about it much in things like education. There is a certain amount of time you can work for and remain productive, and beyond that, you essentially become wasteful. And when you break down your production into segments, the amount of waste increases. So that means if you work for 4 hours, your first 30 minutes are often spent doing what we call retrieval, remembering what it is that you need to do, and building up momentum. Your last 15 minutes is often distractions. You're starting to think, you're getting tired, you're thinking about the next thing you want to do. Like, if I need to go to another meeting after this one, towards the end of this meeting, I'm going to start thinking about that one. I'm like, oh, I need to wrap up soon, I need to finish soon. I start to get distracted, my productivity dips. It doesn't stop, but it dips. And the reason this is important is because if you're trying to work on your own project, especially as a side project, if this is not your main thing, if this is not your 9-to-5 job, you're trying to fit your work into windows around your day job, how long you work for and how often you work for will impact how productive you are. If you try and do 1 hour every evening, that is incredibly wasteful, because you're going to spend a chunk of that just trying to load things up and get started, and you're going to spend a chunk of that getting distracted and not really being focused on what you're doing. You would be better off finding one day and spending 4 to 6 hours on that activity than to trying to do 1 to 2 hours every single day. Even though the amount of time you spend is the same, how much of that time you're productive changes. And this is something that you can learn in just any work environment. It's beyond 6 hours, your productivity dips. This is true for pretty much everyone, with a few rare exceptions, or if it's for like a specific scenario. We talk about crunch time, where you push yourself and you work like 9 hours straight without rest, but you can't maintain that long term. People will try and do a lot all at once, and they will burn themselves out. And it's like such a big thing that I encounter with my students, such a big thing I encountered with indie developers that I've worked with. They get really passionate and really inspired, and they try and do so much all at once that they burn out, and then their productivity drops. They become depressed, they become uninspired, they lose motivation, and then eventually they stop working altogether almost. So the thing I want to stress is, don't try and do everything at once. Break it down and just settle for some progress over time in like small chunks. So don't try and do like 6 hours, or let's say, for example, you work a 9-to-5, don't try and do like 4 hours every evening. It won't work. You might put it off for a little while, you'll burn out, and you'll end up doing less in the long run. Stick with either 4 to 6 hours on the weekend if you've got like a free day, or I would say a good time slot is about 3 hours, 3 times a week. Because 2 hours, 3 hours, you're pretty productive for about 2 hours. And 2 hours is enough time to do tasks and get things done. When we talk about smart targets, and when we talk about breaking down goals into objectives, we often talk about how long will it take to do each of these tasks. The smallest task that you might work on might take anywhere between 1 to 5 minutes. Your medium-sized tasks will take anywhere between an hour to 2 hours. Large tasks you have to save for when you can. But most of the time we break down our day into 2 to 3 hour windows. Even if you're in the office, if you're at school, You might have 2 periods, you have a break, you have another 2 periods, you have lunch, you have another 2 periods. We tend to break things down into those 2-hour slots anyway, because that's how we can maintain productivity without having to stop at all. So there's a difference between a long break and a short break. You can have like a water break where you like get a quick drink, you know, come back, get back to work. Then you have like a long break where you might stop for lunch or you might stop to have dinner. So if you're working for longer than 3 hours, chances are you're going to need to take some kind of break. So you want to be able to do a task, start it, and finish it without anything interrupting you. So when you're breaking down large goals into smaller objectives, we usually tell you, try and break them down into windows where you can do it within an hour or two. Because if it takes longer than that, you're going to get interrupted. And if you get interrupted, that disrupts your workflow and your productive hours drop. So knowing and understanding productive hours, knowing that working for 2 to 3 hours is far more effective than 1 hour multiple times. But working for longer than 6 hours is too much. So we always say like 3 to 6 hours, 3 to 4 or 5 hours, that's your window to get things done. Don't try and do that every day. Break it down into 6 hours once a week or 3 hours 3 times a week, for example. Don't try and do like 1 hour every day, because that might add up to 7 hours in total. But how many of those hours are productive might only be about 3. And this is just true for any project that you work on. But people who are doing like indie development and personal development, they tend to suffer from, I'm going to be productive by doing like 1 hour every day. That's actually very inefficient. So understanding productive hours helps. Capacity is about knowing how many hours you can do in a week in total. So if you say in 1 month, I can work every week, and except for maybe the week of this birthday or the week of this wedding or something, then within that week, I can dedicate 5 uninterrupted hours to this task. Knowing this in advance allows you to plan your tasks far more effectively. People sometimes squeeze what they can in at any given time. That is really ineffective as well. Knowing that I've got 3 hours on a Thursday, I have 4 hours on a Saturday, and I have 4 hours on a Sunday. Those are the days I'm going to work. Other days I will do social activities, I'll do chores, I'll do other things, but those are the days for my game development, because they are uninterrupted. That's the key word here. Uninterrupted hours, meaning you can work without worrying about phone calls, without worrying about meetings, without worrying about having to be somewhere else. One more thing on this point, which is going to really help with productivity, is accountability. You might have heard the term accountability buddy. Sorry, I was at a dentist appointment earlier, so some of my words are slurring. But an accountability buddy is when you tell someone what you're doing, what you intend to do, and when you intend to do it by. Their job isn't to enforce it and make sure you do it. It's simply the process of telling them increases the likelihood of you doing it by something like 66%. It's just the way the human brain works. When we internalize our goals, we tend not to meet them. Whether it's New Year's resolutions or whether it's personal projects, saying it out loud increases the chances of us actually doing it significantly. Actually telling someone that you're going to do it takes that further. So saying out loud, having like a vision board, having somewhere written down like on your desk, having it on a calendar, in a personal journal, that already helps. But telling somebody else and having them know that you're going to do this task increases your probability of doing it, helps you maintain productivity. I find streaming is a great way to do that as well, because if you're online and you're streaming and you're working on a task, the practice and the engagement of talking to people about what you're doing, having a regular schedule, knowing that I'm going to be here at this time on this day doing this thing, helps you maintain a schedule, helps you maintain productivity. But relating this back to why a premise is important for all of this, what you do and what you prioritize comes back to, how does this contribute to your end goal? Do you need to work on this mechanic because it looks cool and it's fun and it's the thing that is giving you a headache right now? Or do you work on this mechanic because you don't have a game until that one's done? It's not fun until that one's done. It's not unique until that one is done. You need to make sure that you're aware of what is important at every stage, because people get distracted, especially programmers. They'll get distracted with trying to make something perfect, with trying to fix a feature, If it works, move on. You can refine it later. That, I can't stress that enough. If you want to finish your games, if you want to finish your products, don't allow for scope creep. Make sure that every time you start a new task, you ask yourself, how does this contribute towards my minimum viable product? If your minimum viable product is done, great. How does it contribute towards my definition of success? And if you've done this, then you can move on. Don't allow yourself to add something that isn't necessary, or work on something just because you think it might make it better. Don't worry about making it better, but worry about making it complete and having a clear definition of done and a minimum viable product that you can see and you can check in like 5 minutes is so much better than having like a large game design document which you have to flick through and spend maybe 20 minutes going through every time. That's why you want to have not just a premise as a thought, but as an actual document that you can refer to. And it's small enough that you can add it to the front page of other documents. To help with that practice, I would say every time you're taking on a task, give yourself 5 minutes beforehand to review what you're doing last time, and 5 minutes at the end of that activity to write down what you have accomplished. Writing down what you've accomplished gives you a sense of completion and satisfaction, but also it means that the next time that you go to work, you can then just read your notes from the last time. People know this works and they get lazy and they don't do it. Always write down what you've accomplished, what problems you encountered, and what you intend to do next at the end of any working activity. Give yourself like an extra 5 or 10 minutes to do that, and you will find that you save 15 minutes next time you're doing a task. So those are my key points when it comes to productivity. The next step in the cycle is the release phase, and I'm not going to go over all the details about release because we'd be here all night. The key thing is releasing is not just about releasing it to the general public. It's about having a product. Sorry, I skipped a step. Testing comes before release. So before you release, you test it. And when the different types of testing, there's continuous testing or like debugging. Like debugging and testing are different. Debugging is checking for mistakes that you've made and making sure your project works. And this is usually done during development. So it's during the development phase, and then at the end of the development phase, you might have dedicated testers. You might do it yourself, or you might give it to someone else, and they're checking for bugs. So that's debugging. Testing, there's a phrase for it which is escaping me right now. I think there's a word for it, but I apologize, I can't remember right now. But testing is about saying, has what you've built achieved what you set out to do? You compare your project to your premise and you say, is it fun? Does it have this feature? Does it generate this experience? Does it look like how I said it should look? Does the emotion that you get match what you said it should do? Like, is it exciting? Is it frightening? Is it emotional? Like, do you get sad, or do you get caught up in the story? If you said this is what you set out to do, make sure that you have. And I think a lot of people forget to do that. A lot of game developers, they focus a lot on it works. I'm so happy it worked. Now I can start showing it to people. Ask yourself, does it do what you set out to do? And if you've been following your premise at every step of development, then your test should pass. But if you are now testing it and you get other people to test it and they don't react in the way that you wanted them to, and they don't see what you wanted them to see, you need to start thinking either A, is this a good thing? Has what you made been better than what you set out to do? Or B, do you need to go back and fix where you went wrong? That's the testing part I wanted to mention, which falls into, then I talk about release, which is when you have a clear idea of what your unique selling points are, what your core selling points are, what your best selling points are, what you're essentially doing is you're taking your premise and you're turning that into marketing material. If you're doing a trailer, though, that's your foundation for a storyboard. If you are releasing like a poster, your poster should show, okay, how do I have a poster that shows the character, the environment, the core mechanics, and the unique selling point all in a single image? You are literally turning your premise into visual material. It is a direct one-to-one translation, because if you're doing anything other than that, you're marketing something else. So again, having a very clear premise means having very clear marketing material. It means you have a very clear understanding of your audience, and you know exactly who you're releasing to. You have a very clear understanding of your platforms, so you know that you're going through Steam and it's going to be a PC game, or maybe you're working with Nintendo, maybe you're working with mobile. You should already have this established, and you shouldn't need to go through tons of documentation to check it. You've already have it summarized, so you already know exactly where to look and where to reference for this information. So I'm sorry that I didn't have my visuals up, because I did want to share the screen. It's just like while I was talking, I couldn't get it to work. But hopefully, like, that makes sense, because I think if I just go back to what I said earlier, one of the most difficult parts for people who are trying to see their own games through to the end is actually finishing their product, because they get caught up with scope creep, and they get caught up with the idea of making it perfect and making it fit the final vision, when what you should be working towards is the minimum viable product. Is it fun with everything else stripped down? Can people play it? Can you build on that from that point onwards? At this point, I'm curious to see if anyone has any questions, anything that they would like to know about any of those points so far. I know I sometimes assume that people already know certain points, and I gloss over things, or I end up repeating things that are unnecessary. I want to make a game now. One thing that I do, and this is an exercise that I recommend anyone to try. So if you, so you don't need to do this right now, but I think it's just a good practice. You can go on Google, and I will sometimes say like random, because you can just type in random like country generator, and it will like give you like a random place in the world. And then I might do like random date, so like a time period, so anything like 1000 to 2000 to 3000. So for example, my random generator gave me India, and then my random date was like 1500s, and I'll be like, okay, can I make a game set in India in the 1500s? Just as a little like thought experiment and exercise. So I saw a question. Hold on for there for a second. Or I'm working on setting up one now, and I'm planning in the planning stage. After this, I'm going back to the premise. No, that's good. I think, as I said, when you have a clear premise, your planning becomes a lot easier, and it just like helps you break down exactly what you need to do, because now I've gone through like all of the key points I wanted to highlight. So I can use this time to go into a little bit more detail on some of the stuff I glossed over. But I think one of the key things about making a good plan is understanding how much effort is going to be involved to each task you need to do, and each component that needs to be completed, and understanding when and how you're going to fit that into your schedule of production. So this is why having capacity and understanding like the planning is great. But then going back to, what's the first thing you need to do? What's the most important things? Do you know what, as I said, what makes your game fun? What makes your game exciting? What's the experience? How is someone going to walk away from your game and feel a certain way about it? Like, what's your goal? Because if you finish the plan first and then go back to the premise, you might find that you now need to change the plan again. My advice, just go through that exercise of, this is my premise, this is like my core details that I want to like put together. Sorry, my throat is getting a bit dry there, but I think, sorry, I'm just checking. Do you recommend people learn the basics of Agile? You reference it a lot, and I think it's great. Yeah, like originally I was planning to go through Agile as a process, and I think for those that don't know Agile, there are, I would say, arguably, there are several different types of development strategies, 3 of them come up quite often. One, and I'm only going to mention this just so you know not to do it. One is prototyping, and that is when you build a project, basically you just try and make it work, and then you edit it and adjust it and make tweaks to it over time. It's essentially like freestyling or winging it. It's great if you just need to like proof of concept. It's very unstructured. It's not a good idea for actual like long-term maintenance of a project. The other approach, and this was the most popular approach up until about 2010, was the waterfall approach. And that is, you go through, the concept is always going forward. You go through each stage and you complete that stage one by one. So I will spend a week on developing my premise, doing customer research, making sure I know all of the key things I want to do, a month on, or several months on planning, then maybe 2 years on development, a year on testing, and then release it. You never go back. You never double check your work. You never take a step back into another step, another part of the process. It's great for like strict deadlines and structured development. Like if you're doing construction, if you're making a building, you don't have the luxury of, I'm going to start building it and now I'm going to change the plan. But it's terrible for games, and that's why it became less popular over time. So I'm just going to read like some of these questions before I continue. How to actually think about a story theme of a project, as there are tons of games from AAA to indie level that are already out there for almost all the themes. How do you think about the elements that can make your game interesting and stand out from the rest of them? That's a great question, and I think I'll give you some examples of that. I want to start there. So what I'll do is I'll finish my thought on Agile, just so that I complete that, and I'm going to ask that question next. So the reason I was talking about waterfall, which is the always forward approach, is because with Agile, instead of spending large chunks of time completing individual steps, we spend a small amount of time going through all of the steps. Usually we use sprints, and that would be like a 2-week window where you'd spend 1 day on premise and planning, 7 days on development, maybe 3 days on testing, and then 1 day on just like reviewing and completing the work before you reset the cycle. And you reset the cycle by saying, did we achieve what we set out to do? Is there anything that did work? Is there anything that didn't work? What went well? What went poorly? What do we keep doing? What do we stop doing? Those are the 4 questions of those last ones. And the reason you do this is because games take a long time to develop, and as a creative process, you will find things change as you go. So after like 4 sprints, you might find this game mechanic isn't as good as we thought, or this feature isn't fun. We need a different feature. By not investing months in a design or a plan that you're now going to have to change, you've only invested weeks or even days, and you're like, no, we need to fix something. It's about failing fast, finding the problems, and then adjusting. That's the Agile approach. And it doesn't have to be weeks. You can do it like, I can do Agile in a single day, but it's the idea of breaking it down into steps, then going back to the beginning, reviewing it, and seeing if you need to make any changes. Going through that, all of this, the life cycle in consistent rhythm. Someone else has said, before I get onto that main point, is there a place where we can find your notes or something similar on this topic? It's also good info that I will need to go back over. I will, when the video goes up, I'm going to put like a slideshow of like the key topics I've covered. I cover this often, usually on my TikTok or my Twitch account, where I go through these details, but I'm going to do like an actual slides that you can just like look through yourself and get these key points. So if you go through, I'll post something at the end so you can find those. But I did want to go back to that story one, because narrative design is one of the key things that I tend to talk about. And I love the topic. It's just something I love talking about. So when I talk about narrative design and how do you make a story interesting, you first need to really understand stories and storytelling. So telling a story and your starting point of telling a game, I always say all stories have a beginning, middle, and end. Usually there's a twist. Sometimes you'll have like a prelude or prologue, but all stories have a beginning, a middle, and an end. There are things that you want to establish at each step of this journey. The beginning, establish your environment. If it's like set in the real world, great. makes it very quick and very easy. But if it's set in a fictional world, you need to establish what is this world as it is right now. So I refer to this as the present. Establish your main characters. So that is the ones that are going to be consistent throughout the story. So your main character, like your protagonist, secondary characters, tertiary. Beyond that, you might have time to do other things, but establish your protagonist and who they are right now. So again, the present. When you're doing the middle, that's when you can really, because what sometimes people do is they introduce a goal for the main character. Like, I'm going to use a random example like Naruto. I want to become Hokage. That's his goal at the start, but his real goal actually doesn't come until later, which I'm not going to go into the details, but it becomes to do with Sasuke as a secondary character. So in the middle of your story, you introduce the real goal, the thing that this story is centered around, something that this character has to do before this story is complete. Who or what it is that is stopping them from completing it. Just like in a game, you have a goal and you have an antagonist or your obstacles. In a story, you have your goal and you have your antagonist. The other things that you want to establish during the bulk of your story is the history. Why are the characters who they are now? So you start with the present, then you go to the past. What happened to them? What caused them to be this way? How did they reach this point? Same with the world and the environment. Was there war? Was there revolution? Was there an industrial, update where new technology has been discovered or new magic has been discovered? What led to the current environment, and what problem has been presented that they're now trying to overcome? And when you're telling a story, you want to lead up to, once you've established all of this information, you're leading up to the end. The end isn't the conclusion. It's not the last 5 minutes. The end is the point in which all of that information is established and no new information is necessary to tell the story, all the way up until have they or have they not overcome their final obstacle. Stories don't always end with you winning, naturally, but there will be some degree of a conclusion. So the stretch between having established all of the key information and the final confrontation and what happens after the final confrontation, so what we call the future of your story, that all comes at the end. And with that said, that is just the basic structure of any story. The real interesting parts come in when you remember this one detail. Like, I could talk about stories for hours. One detail that I think everyone needs to remember, everyone should think about: what makes good stories is relationships. I once went to a talk about narrative design, and somebody was saying, why is it that action movies and romance movies seem so different? Romance movies are usually about like the guy getting the girl, or the girl getting the guy, or something along those lines. And action movies are usually about like saving the world or rescuing someone. But almost all movies end the same, because very few movies, and if you actually think about it, very few movies, action movies, end with the world being saved, or with the bad guy being stopped, or with the hostage being rescued. It usually ends with them returning to someone they care about and sharing their victory with a person that they love or admire or respect. Because what we love about stories is relationships, and it's how we express them. The relationships between your main character and their friends, your relationship between the main character and the love interest, the relationship between them and their family, the relationship between them and their enemies. So when you're trying to tell a compelling story, once you've got the world building out of the way and that whole structure of present, past, and future, to make it interesting, think about how the characters interact with each other. Just like when you're making a game and you have every task you do should contribute towards your end goal, every scene in a story should contribute towards the flow of that story. And if it's not contributing to the conclusion, it should be contributing towards the relationships that you're developing. How characters talk to each other. Do they talk to each other differently? Why do they talk to each other differently? Is respect an issue? Is jealousy an issue? Is envy an issue? How do they overcome this? Is the antagonist in the story the relationship itself? Like you can have two people who start off friends become enemies, or you can have one person who their enemy is themselves. They keep getting in their own way, they're stubborn, they are unreasonable, and their own personal growth is the victory. But when you understand relationships and you understand that is at its core what makes stories really fascinating and passionate, then you'll start to find that people relate to them much better. Don't worry about tropes. Don't worry about having the smart one and the cool one and the character, the audience insert character. Just focus on what characters would naturally occur in this environment. Why would they be the way they are? And who would they care about and how would they interact with them? I often write my environments first and then think about what characters would thrive in this environment and what characters would struggle in this environment, and then tell those both sides of that story. Because your villains might be the ones who struggle. If the environment is good, your villain is often the one that struggles. If your environment is bad, your villain is often the one who succeeds. So if I set an environment which is desolate wasteland, the villain of the story is usually the guy that's thriving in this environment. The hero is struggling and he wants to make change. Or if you want to make it that, you know, everyone's happy, you're living in a peaceful environment, the hero is thriving, the villain is struggling, and they're trying to destroy this environment for their own personal gain. I can talk about writing different types of characters, writing different types of villains, writing different types of protagonists. It is good to know the tropes. It is good to know the difference between an underdog and a paragon, for example. I often use comic characters to describe them, like Superman or Luffy or Goku are often considered paragons. They, especially Luffy and Superman, they are what you aspire to be. Their characters don't develop over the course of the story. Their relationships with other characters develop over the course of the story. Whereas characters like Naruto is an underdog. He's struggling from the very beginning. The environment is almost against him. But through personal growth, he actually learns to evolve and do better. And how you want to address that, again, is up to you. And then I think the other major, there's lots of different types, but the other major one is everyman. And I actually think Ichigo is an example of everyman. They're not exceptional and they're not struggling. They're just doing all right. They're in the middle. They're easy to relate to because they are like almost average, but they have something about them that puts them above average. And the truth is, and this is something that helps a lot of people relate to your characters, everyone usually does have something that makes them above average. We often get caught up on the details of, hey, this guy's really smart, or this guy is really strong, or this guy's really fast. But you forget, this guy's really sociable. This guy has great way with words. This guy's always knows the right thing to say to like make someone feel better. We all tend to have something about us that we excel in, and your every main characters can be like, they're average in almost every regard, but they have that one thing that makes them cool or interesting or great. And then you tell your story because you've created an environment where that one thing is the thing that everyone else needs. This guy is great at relationships, and he's in a world where everyone is not getting along, and he like brings them together. He's the peacekeeper, and he creates that peace and that order within the world. You can throw out like random traits and you can see how that works. And I think if you're looking at villains, I'm not going to go through every villain trope, but I do think there's a few that are interesting. Like when they say what's the difference between a hero and a villain, here, because they usually both have tragic backstories a lot of the time, not always. A hero will often sacrifice themselves to help others, whereas the villain will sacrifice others to help themselves. And this includes and I think Dr. Freeze is a great example of this. Dr. Freeze from the Batman series, he wants to save his wife. His wife, from his perspective, is an extension of himself, someone he cares about. So he's willing to sacrifice everyone else to save someone he cares about. Whereas someone like Batman would let his wife die, and then the rest of the world would do better. It sounds cruel. It almost sounds callous. And sometimes we can relate to the villain better than we can the heroes. And when you get a villain who can be related to in that way, they tend to be a lot more compelling. and their relationship with the hero. Some stories just say, hey, they're just opposites. It's usually more interesting when they're actually very similar and they have something about them that is just, they've made a decision that's different, and that's what they so irreconcilable difference, and that's why they're at opposite ends of a feud or a dispute or something. So you could go into lots of things, but I do think the concept of storytelling in general applies to games. I do think games are the best way to tell stories, and I think you can tell great stories through games by following those same rules, because what makes games different is the player has control. In a game that's less narrative focused, what methods would you recommend to convey a story without taking the player out of the action, aside from something like environmental storytelling? It's funny you say that, because the first thing that I thought was environmental storytelling. I think you can. I do think the main one is environmental storytelling, if you have an idea of the different ways you can utilize it. So I know you said other than, but a few examples is you have, cutscenes and you have dialogue. You also have barks. If you don't know what a bark is, it's when the story's being told without interrupting gameplay. Like you're walking by a fence and a character's like, oh, I remember like the last time I was here and a monster came through. It's like, it's just random dialogue, not random, it's story-based dialogue that doesn't interrupt gameplay when it comes in. The other one, and just because I was talking to someone about this just last night, is can you do like crime scene investigation? Can you literally tell a story purely through environment? Have 3 statues perfectly maintained, and then have a 4th one which is slightly decayed, has like moss growing on it. Each statue represents a deity. Each deity is slightly different. That on its own tells you these 3 deities are highly worshipped and this one is being neglected. There's probably less people in the environment who worship that deity. Something happened to cause this disparity. So things like that can help you tell the story. If you're looking at other things, and again, this still counts as environmental, but use of color and use of music, such powerful tools. Some games do this exceptional. Changing the color tones, going from like monochrome to bright, vibrant to dark, can change the entire emotional response. And having the music change when you go through different locations also achieves, I think, the same thing. But I think like it would take me a long time to explain the ways of doing that. So I'm just going to check this next question. Do you have any storytelling tips for a game that has minimal characters or NPCs due to a small scope? Focus on the character's internal monologue. I've got one story that I'm working on. I've had to put it on hold because we built the game already, and then there was a massive like tech update, so we have to like rebuild it. But when I do get back to it, the game is a single character in a single environment. They are entirely alone. So the story is actually their own psychosis. One of the main threats in the game is that they are slowly losing their mind from isolation. I introduced this idea of flashbacks, and they might be traveling through the city and they'll start imagining, oh, when I was here last, it was a picnic with my family or something. And by exploring the flashback, the environment changes to show you the history. It shows you the inside of their mind working. The unique mechanic that I introduced is the more you explore the flashback, the harder it is to get back to reality, because reality will disappear as the flashback takes control. And you now need to kind of navigate your own mind to get back to reality, because there's a problem you're trying to solve. And you need to stay on mission. That's such a cool story. Thank you. I personally really love that idea. And I'm like, I really want to make that game, but key thing to keep in mind, one thing at a time. Don't try and multitask. Don't try and do multiple projects. So I put that on ice, but I definitely have like this vision of, it's like programming wise, it's pretty straightforward. Character wise, the dialogue is essentially just one character talking to themselves. We might have a few characters speak, but we can also use speech bubbles and thought bubbles, because that only adds to the psychosis, that they don't hear the voices, they just know what they're saying. So you can play with stuff like that, but have them interact with the limited number of characters, have their emotional journey be part of the dialogue. And I think that's how you can tell a good story with limited characters and limited scope. The more massive number of characters makes it harder. But if you focus on just one or two characters and then just how they interact with each other and how their relationship changes, there's another thing to think about. Have a little study about people who live together for the first time. If you have two people going on a journey, we often like, oh, they become great friends by the end of it. Well, actually, in most examples, they start to get really frustrated with each other and start to have like a lot of clashes and butt heads because people don't like spending too much time together. So explore that dynamic and how they can go between camaraderie from surviving hardship together, trauma bonding, and frustration of close proximity. Take a look at psychology, and it will help you tell better stories in regards to relationships when you have less characters to work with. And I think the second point of that was, I love it when games use environment colors in that way. Journey is a great example and does excellent job at changing colors throughout the game. I think Journey is one of my go-tos, and in fact, one of the first projects I did once I went as an indie developer was we met these musicians, no gaming experience or background, and they were like, we want to make a game like Journey. But they had this idea of like using music as a core mechanic of the game, and how you travel through different places. It's the music telling the story, and the music changes to tell you that this is like a sad part or this is an exciting part, and the music related to their memories. And depending on if you were closer to the threat or closer to the goal, the music would shift. And I can't tell you too much because it was like their project. We were just helping them build it, but the idea was, I thought, really creative. But yeah, Journey was a big part of their inspiration behind it. And I think as game developers and game designers, playing Journey is a great way to learn about storytelling, especially through environment. I think that's a great one. But I'm going to kind of go back to both of those points of storytelling and scope. And I think when you don't use narrative, I think use also the puzzles themselves, and use the things like difficulty and intensity. So if the game is getting harder or the frequency of events are coming together more tightly, that changes the experience, and that can actually relate directly to the narrative. So in Battle Drive, which is the main project we're working on right now, you are driving through and up to and including the end of the world. As you play the game, there's going to be, like, at the start of the game, there's like an earthquake, you know, a large amount of the city is damaged, and you're trying not to like crash and not to die, basically. And that's just like the first event. When you're playing other levels, because of the massive damage, terrain is unstable, there'll be landslides, there'll be flooding, there'll be like explosions. This is the aftermath of the earthquake. But the longer you play, the more disasters keep happening. So you might encounter a tornado, or you might encounter another earthquake, or earthquakes of higher frequency. The increase in frequency and the damage dealt, again, this feels like I'm telling a story for your environment, but it's a different way of doing it. The damage dealt is telling the story. It's telling you that there is actually a countdown, because at a certain point in the game, all of these different disasters coalesce at one. And that is the climax of the game, is when it's like the more frequently you encounter them, it's telling you that this is a clock, this is a timer. And eventually it's just going to be pure disaster. There's going to be no rest. There's not going to be no like waiting period or safe zone or reprieve. And that's one of the ways we tell a story. Another way is through branching. Does the character's actions change how the game develops? Because you can indirectly tell a story in that way as well. If one of my favorite concepts that we incorporate in our games is delayed gratification. I think it's a very important concept to be aware of. The idea of working harder now and not getting the reward immediately means getting a greater reward later. So if you want to say the play style of your gamer can mean not doing the easy thing now will change how the game evolves later, and the game will get easier later, or you'll get better rewards or better features later because you were able to put in the extra effort at the beginning. That is another kind of narrative, and you are telling a story in that way as well. And it doesn't require a lot of dialogue. It doesn't require a lot of characters. It doesn't require a large team. Anytime you're working with robots, structures, vehicles like cars, you'll find it's easier than people, animals, and monsters. From a development side, from an art side, if you've got a small team or you have a smaller scope, it's easier to work with these things. Try and, like, if you're working on your first game, think about how you can do first person instead of third person. Let's worry about animation. Think about how you can use color as part of the story, because maybe the environment being black and white or the environment being gray is part of your story, so you don't need to spend as much time on art. Maybe you are shifting into a geometric environment, so you do have more blocks and shapes and stuff like that. You can use the simple things that you have to tell a story. And this goes back to what I said earlier about minimum viable product. The story is what comes after you establish, like, what is the minimum you want to portray, and still be fun and still be enjoyable. You don't need everything. You just need enough to get that emotional response. And that means, do you have a goal and does your character achieve it? And at each chapter of your story, that might mean each level of your game, is there a further breakdown? So if your entire story breaks down to beginning, middle, and end, every level should have a beginning, middle, and end. That level should have a goal. That level should have an obstacle that is unique to that level. That level should have an environment that you need to introduce and you need to establish for the player. And when you complete that level, it should feel like you have achieved something. It shouldn't just be you've now passed like a checkpoint. It should feel like I've completed my own individual mini story. Another thing that we do is we use comic strips and slideshow, like almost like slideshows to tell the story. So it's like you don't have to have like a cutscene. You can have thought bubbles instead of speech. You can have slides, like text sliding across. Other ways to convey what's happening without having to actually like put in the work of dialogue and voices and other things that can be difficult when you're a small team or don't have a lot of people to work with. Hopefully that helps answer the question. So let me see what the next one. As a game designer, what do you want to see from a concept artist in order to inspire your ideas for a game development side? Is it narrative, possibly gameplay references, storyboards, etc.? As a designer, I want to see probably a concept board or I think the best thing to see would be an image of how the story ends. If you as a concept artist can show me the character that I've envisioned or that you've envisioned, depending on who, because the designer isn't always the product owner. I forgot about that. You might have someone else who wrote the story and then the designer is just putting it together, but that's a separate thing. But if you can say, here is the character that is in the game, here is the obstacle that they have overcome, because in games we assume that you do succeed at the end. Here's the enemy that they've overcome, like maybe if it's an environment, it's been destroyed, or if it's a person, they're on the floor, whatever. And if you can incorporate the mechanics of that game into the image, if you can incorporate the gameplay, like, for example, in one of my games, Silent Symphony, we use music to cast magic. So if I can see how the music is affecting the environment in your image without you having to like tell me, it should be like in the background, it should be infused. If you can tell the entire story of this game in a single image, that would be impressive. That would be like the perfect vision board that I can now use to make sure that everything else we're doing stays on point. Because sometimes I've had both of these. I've had an image and I'll be like, that's it. That's what we're working towards. That's stick that on the wall every day. That's what I'm looking at. That's my goal. And I've had the same with music. I'm like, I hear a song. I'm like, that's the song. Like, I don't care. Some way, somehow that song represents our game. That is our theme. Like I had a musician once make a track for me. He made like 5 tracks. I listened to like the first 2 I think it was the second one. I was like, that's it. That's the soundtrack. I listened to the rest. I was like, doesn't matter. That second one, perfect. Sometimes if you can trigger that response where now me as a designer, I can envision everything from the thing that you created. So I have a vision in my head, and it's hard for me to show you. If you can show me what's in my own head, then I can now be like, yes, you get me. And now we can work together to like bring it to life. And we can work with the other artists, we can work with programmers and so on. One of the main jobs of a designer is to communicate with the artists and the programmers and to be an intermediary for them to make sure they stay on target. That's why if you've got a premise, you can be like, have you read the premise? Because I've worked in a lot of different environments, and I've worked with people who worked in a lot of different environments. And one of the biggest problems that we encounter is onboarding, because you start in a new job and they're like, here's everything you need to know about this job. And it's like a Harry Potter book or something. It's like Order of the Phoenix. It's going to take you a lifetime to read through. And they just like skim through it and then they put it down and like, I'll figure out as I go. You want to be able to say like in literally 5 or 10 minutes, here's what you actually need to know. Everything else, the details are somewhere else. That's the game design document. But here's what you need to know. And if I can show you an image, like we just discussed, and be like, this is what we're working towards, that helps them understand very quickly. So the designer wants to be able to communicate their vision to the programmer, to the other artists, to the sound guys, to the marketing team, to the any clients or investors, and know that they can just show them the idea instead of having to describe it. So that's what the designer wants. And that's why it's useful if the designer is an artist themselves. But if you as an artist can give them that, they will love you for it. Yeah, like I did see you responded already, but I got a bit passionate about that because I felt like that was a really good point. And it's something that I personally have spent a lot of time on. I started as a designer. I've been designing board games, tabletop games since I was like 10. I taught myself to program because I wanted to make the games that I designed, and then I ended up like getting a career as a programmer is just easier. It's very hard to find a job as a designer because a lot of people want to be designers, and a lot of companies will hire designers in-house. And you can't learn design in school, not very effectively. Like at uni you can, but before uni it's very, I would say, combine creative writing with media studies and you get something close. So it's hard to study and it's hard to prove that you're good at it, so it's hard to get a career in it. So a lot of the time people will get jobs in either programming or art or UI, for example, which is another one that's very close to design. And that's as close as they get, and then they try and work their way laterally within a company. So it's like you get your foot in the door, then you find a department, and then you try and get into that department. But I've worked with a lot of professionals, people senior to me, and they were like, that's a terrible approach. It's not very effective. It works sometimes, but it's not very effective. So if you are designers, the easiest way to be a designer is to design your own games, obviously, which is why a lot of people go indie and they just build their own teams. In which case you need help to visualize your ideas. Otherwise, you need to prove that you have design skills, and that is hard because there's not a lot of content out there to help you be a designer. If you are designers, good examples, things to do, make games. Like I said earlier, minimum viable product. Don't worry about making a big game that's really impressive. Make a complete game that is fun, and that proves that you know about design. Edit other people's games. So like Minecraft, Roblox, even things like Halo had the map editing option. Stuff like that. D&D campaigns is a great example of design. So if you run the D&D campaign, if you're the game master, that is a great way to show design skills. And yeah, it's like go to game jams and work with other people, work with teams. One of the key things about being a designer is being a communicator and understanding how to speak with other people of other disciplines, which is why actually having skills in those areas does help. Learn a bit of programming. You don't need to be a programmer, but learn a bit of it. Learn the tools that we use, Unity, Unreal, etc. Learn how to do modeling, maybe 3D Studio Max or Blender. Learn how to do animation. You don't need to be good at it, but if you know how it works, it's easier for you to communicate to people who do it, and therefore you can be a better designer for them. Because a designer is often the guy that leads the team, or at least facilitates them. So it's a very difficult career to get into, and I was actually planning to do like I was going to do like a panel of just game designers, like people who work in the industry as designers, to get them to give like feedback on how they got into that role, because designing independently is great, but it's a different process to getting a job as a designer, because the hiring process is so competitive. It's like crazy competitive. And it's probably harder than programming and art careers. I think we've got like 8 minutes left. So this is an opportunity if there's just any more questions, so I don't just like ramble on. I think I'm just checking if there's anything else that I wanted to say, because I did have like a checklist of points I wanted to cover, but I think I've gone through the key points. So maybe I'll just use this as a chance to recap. Going back to the other question about agile, using agile development, understanding the development lifecycle. So we have these are the steps, premise, plan, develop, test, release, and maintenance. I didn't talk much about maintenance. It's an optional step. It depends on how long a project is going. A lot of what we do at Creative Genius is help bridge the gap between education and industry. Because in education, one of the issues is it takes years to update a curriculum. We did a curriculum overview 2 months ago. The last one was about 8 years ago. Technology evolves every 6 months. So it is so hard to keep up with technology when the frequency of curriculum updates are like every decade. So you can imagine they're always behind. They're just, and it's inevitable. The other issue is education focuses on individual assessment, but games development is almost always team orientated. So even if you work on a team, you're still being assessed as an individual. So it's hard to show your ability to work as a team, which is what a lot of industry company people are looking for. If they don't think you know how to work on a team, they don't think you have good communication skills or people skills, they're going to be like, I'm not sure if they're going to be a good fit for us. If you're lucky, they'll be like, you'll learn on the job. But if you can find someone who they know has worked on teams, this is why game jams and independent projects are so important, then you're going to have a huge leg up over people who just went to uni or have a project that they built entirely on their own. So yeah, like showing that teamwork, but leading back to my point, schools have a very fixed time frame. So you often only work on a project for like the maximum of like a couple of months, most of the time a couple of weeks. So you don't have that sense of how do you build a project with good practices that allow you to come back to it later, that allow someone else to come back to it and build on it. Maintenance strategies are just completely overlooked. Most schools still teach waterfall as a production strategy. They talk about agile, but they don't use it in the school because they can't. They don't have the environment for it. If about the first release, even if not publicly, but only with a handful of people, what are the basic things that should be there that can at least convey the project theme, the goal, or I don't know, I hope you understand. I would say if you are releasing your game, and this is not publicly, but like let's say for a test, go back to your premise. Everything that I listed in the premise is what should be there. Your core selling point, your core mechanics. If your core mechanics, I'm going to use Battle Drive because that's an easy example I can draw from. I need to be able to drive. I need to be able to transition between levels. I need to be able to have basic instructions. You want it to be intuitive. So the player should know how to play. You shouldn't have to backseat drive and tell them what to do. That, even for me, I've overlooked that so many times. I'm so focused on making it work, I forget adding tutorials and adding instructions as part of my initial release. Your unique mechanic needs to be there, because if it's not there, what are you testing? You need to have an understanding of what your goal is in terms of the experience. Like I said, is it supposed to be exciting? Is it supposed to be fun? Is it supposed to be sad? Is it supposed to be educational? You should have that written down, and then you should be able to say, when you've released the initial product, when they play it, are they having a reaction that coincides with what you wanted them to have? You don't need to have the final visuals. You don't need to have the final like colors and models and so on. You can actually get away a lot with not having that. You do need to have enough of a visual that they at least have an idea of where it's going. I think because things like UI matter a lot to the player experience. And if you're going to have, let's say in my early test, I had buildings that would like topple. They were literally large rectangles or cubes, and they would just like fall over. It doesn't look like a building, but you can visualize it as a building. It's close enough. And then I might change the color to make it more building-esque. So it would be like brick color or something. It's not textured. It's just easier to imagine what the final product will look like. So don't worry too much about the visuals, which is what most people worry about, because visuals sell your product. But when you're testing it for the first time, is it fun? Because one of the best games, Thomas Was Alone, I think it's called, is geometric shapes. It's a square, a triangle, and a rectangle, and the whole game is just like moving through the game as like a square, rectangle, a triangle, and I think a cube, or a square, yeah, something like that. But graphically, it's like as simple as it can possibly be. But the game design was so good that the game won awards on how fun and intuitive and innovative it was. So make sure you've got your core mechanic, your unique mechanic. You want to get in, you don't have to have your plot in there. I would say you need a goal, something that the player is trying to achieve. You need an obstacle that's trying to stop them. Not every obstacle. Ideally, what is the main antagonist of your game? And your individual obstacles should be like children of the antagonist. So my battle driving antagonist is the world is dying, literally. So the main like obstacles are going to be like earthquakes, tornadoes, hurricanes, tidal waves. There are other things, enemies, characters, robots, whatever, but they're not like main derivatives of the main antagonist. So the main antagonist, their derivatives should be like your main obstacles. That way they get a feel of what the main bulk of the game will be. Antagonist, goal, solution. So again, how do you overcome these obstacles with just your core mechanic and your unique mechanic? Don't worry about power-ups, don't worry about buffs, don't worry about leveling. Just with the skills you start with, can you get to the end? Ideally, not necessarily, but ideally have like 2 levels. I would say have 3. A first level as just like a tutorial, get used to the controls. A second one that introduces the real threats and a game over scenario. You do want there to be a lose condition. And then the third one, which basically that's like the boss fight. And that's useful not just because it tells a story, but because it tests transition mechanics. So from a programmer's standpoint, how you transition from one level to the next needs to be established. Do you have like, does it just cut from one to the other? Do you fade in, fade out? Do you have to, do you have multiplayer? Do you need to worry about like how to maintain the host? So it's like from a practical side, that's very useful to have that transitional process. Throw in a title screen just so like makes it a little bit prettier, makes it feel more professional, and it's very low effort. Again, if you've got like that beautiful image of your game and what it will look like when it's finished, use that as your title screen so people will be like, that's where we're going. Or use it as a credit screen because you'll be like, this is what it looks like now, play it, this is what it will look like at the end. Doesn't hurt to have a thank you at the end as well, like thank the players for taking part. Give them the opportunity to follow your project, whether that's Instagram or LinkedIn or Skytree. Having your social media and having like even a Steam page so that people can be like, I liked playing this, I want to see the next version, I want to see what happens next. Start building your community from your very first demo. Anyone that you get to test it, anyone who gets to look at it, give them the chance to come back and see it for themselves. Build that loyalty, and they will be the ones that will tell you when you're going off track, and they'll be the ones that tell you when this works and more of this, and you'll benefit a lot from that. Your project will grow faster from the encouragement, and it will be better for the feedback. And a good community gives you good feedback. They're not just going to say, I like this or I don't like this. They're going to tell you explicitly what to look out for and where the you know, where you need to make those changes. Because if you just listen to everyone, you're going to have a mess. But if you have like the people that have been with you since the beginning, they will give you the best like insight and feedback. And that would be my advice in regards to just putting together that first release. It also really helps from a technical standpoint. Releasing can be tricky, like the actual filing process and the actual exporting it. Things like Unity, releasing to build is different to playtesting. So going through the process is also good practice. And sometimes you'll find crap that doesn't work, or you need to have certain files to export or import or include. Programmers worry about this side. So if you're not the programmer, it's not really your job to worry. But doing that process, having enough of the game and then releasing it, means you will find any critical errors that need to be addressed before you spend years building your game and then you have to like change something. So that's one more thing that I think is important. But yeah, hopefully that was great. And answer your questions. It does give a lot of clarity. Oh, excellent. I'm glad for that. I said earlier, like, I will post some of the content that we covered today, just like maybe like a slideshow or a deck that you can just kind of go through. I don't have one now. What I would, if it's okay, if I put like the website on the chat, anyone who's interested I'll post it on there, and then you'll be able to find it like later. Or Nikita, maybe you can advise a good place for me to like add this details for them to then follow up if they want to like find out more, go back through the like a notes summary of what we discussed.
Yeah, that'd be great. I mean, I can always add it to the YouTube video.
Oh yeah,
if that works. Or you don't have them now, do you? Like,
no. So I'll summarize what we went through, and then I'll like maybe I'll send it to you, and you can, or I can put it as a comment, you know, in the description of the YouTube video or something.
That'd be great. Yeah, thank you.
But yeah, thank you everyone for joining me today. I hope you found this useful. I know I talk a lot, so hopefully I didn't bore anyone